This is a Ben Frank Connection presentation.
We are back and live. ABJ presents Tornado Tag, episode 116, the history of Bruiser and Crusher. ABJ joined once again by the other host of this show, BP Burke. We have pulled officially in our long friendship the latest time we've ever came home from a pro wrestling show last night.
Daylight savings did assist. Let's be fair. What would normally be about an hour drive back was 2 hours because it went from 1:59 to 3 a.m.
Yeah. So I pulled up the house at what, 4 in the morning. My mom's like, "Are you alive? It's 4 in the morning." I'm like, technically, I'm good. We're
It
fine.
should be 3, which is also very late. Yes.
We always have that competition with the neon blondes, first in, last out. We won, but once again, with an assist to a bar.
Yeah, and unfortunately, with an assist to Facade being a little bang up, and a lot of anything. Actually, there was somebody else that had it worse than us.
Who's that?
I don't know if I want to name names, but somebody involved with the PPW show last night hit a porcupine on the way home, and it blew their transmission out, and they had to get towed.
Oh no!
Yeah,
Jesus. Transmissions are a bitch. I lost mine.
Yeah,
once. It's a bad.
I'm not going to say exactly who it is, but this person knows a little bit about cars, so hopefully they'll be okay.
That doesn't help me.
They can drive very fast and around the track sometimes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
that does help. Yeah, he can rebuild that shit.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah,
he can build anything.
So,
he can build literally anything.
Yeah, he'll be good. He'll be fine. So yeah, man, we had an interesting week of wrestling. So news-wise, what stands out, BP?
News-wise, I have been in my own world, so I honestly don't know. Was it this week or last week that Drew McIntyre officially re-signed with WWE? I know that's a big thing.
Yep.
It's now coming out that I guess Brock Lesnar is back on the roster page, so that could be an inkling that he may be back in the mix soon. And Kazuchika Okada is officially AEW bound. Everybody pretty much had a feeling that was the case.
But not only is he back, he comes back and turns heel.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, is that now execution wise not as good as Hogan joining the NWO, right? Like it's not at the same level.
Right. And Okada
is the same importance, right? Would you say so?
No. Okada is not the biggest star in American wrestling. Hulk Hogan, when he turned heel, had been to that point the biggest star in American wrestling for 12 years.
What if Hogan went to Japan and turned heel?
He was big in Japan too. It's a big deal for people who have followed Okada's career. It's a big deal for people who are into that scene. And more to the point, Okada kind of started that not as essentially as a heel. New Japan doesn't really do heels and baby faces the way we do for the most part. You'll have people who are kind of heelish, like the Bullet Club, because the Bullet Club was supposed to be a Japanese take on American wrestling. There you go. A member of the Bullet Club, the Inevitable Club as well, Ace Austin. So it's a big deal in so much as AEW is loaded for bear right now. They're gonna, in a matter of 3 weeks, Will Ospreay has finished his other commitments. He is in. He is locked in. It seems like he's going with Bryan Danielson. Okada is in. He's with the Elite. He's with the Young Bucks. It seems like this is what we're going to get when Kenny Omega comes back. We're going to run Omega Okada back. It's been long enough, and it hasn't happened in the US yet. It's been long enough since they have It's been long enough since they have had their trilogy, and I think they may have done a few extra in G1s, that it will be fresh, and part of this audience may not have seen it.
Well, and it's also like it adds to it because he has been removed as an elite member, and
Yeah.
Okada has replaced him.
Right, right. And if you're going to do Okada Omega in the US in AEW, it makes sense for Okada to be the heel. It
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. I have taken shots at AEW's booking before. There's things I have very strongly disagreed with that they have done. This makes a lot of sense.
Did you watch last Wednesday?
Yes. I thought it was a strong show. I enjoyed
I did
this
too.
one.
I thought that entire show, every second somebody was on camera, it led to continuing or starting a story.
It did. I honestly think, and this sounds strange, because usually longer term storytelling is for the best. It looks like they're going to be moving to monthly pay-per-views now. Their next pay-per-view, I believe, will be in April. And
yes, Dynasty.
Yeah. And then in May it'll be Falcon Crest.
Yeah.
And then it's going to be all the old lady soaps from the 80s. And then we're going to have
Days of Our Lives.
AW Knots Landing is coming.
It's gonna be Passions has to come too. Passions.
There you go. I was thinking of the nighttime soaps. AW Melrose Place. AW 90210 from Beverly Hills. So the other thing is this week is going to be their big business show that they've been teasing, which it's the worst kept secret in wrestling. They did the same thing they did with Punk. It's going to be Mercedes Moné is coming.
All right, so we said that before that he was kind of selling this as it's going to be a biggest night in wrestling history. Big things are going to happen. It's something we're going to be talking about forever. We have a championship match on the line. Joe versus Wardlow, and it seems like that story is Wardlow is getting to a point where he's going to possibly get a title, and then Adam Cole's going to be like, "Hand me the title," and MJF has been out of the mix for a while. Like, do they pull the trigger here and they put a title shot together to continue that story? Does Joe lose the world title on national television?
I don't know if he loses it to Wardlow. My personal opinion is if he loses it to anybody but Swerve, you've made a mistake.
Because I don't think Swerve's going for the title anymore. I think he's going to do another program with Hangman to stretch that out so they can tell this Adam Cole MJF Wardlow story. One
of the trickiest things you can do with a champion, especially if you're going to try to build a new babyface champion, one of the things you really have to do if you want to book a champion effectively, and this is something like WWE failed, or WWF at the time failed to do with Kevin Nash, with Diesel. And to an extent, they failed to do it with MJF until the Adam Cole thing kind of fell into their hands.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest mistakes you can make is to do an important title switch, to have this is something they got to think about with Cody Rhodes, provided Cody is going to win at WrestleMania. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But if you're going to have a guy that you're putting the title on, you're saying this could be the guy that carries our company. And Swerve could be the next guy for AEW. He could be a guy that's an important piece of the puzzle. This is something they really failed with Hangman Page the first time. Even more so than MJF. When Hangman Page won the title, you have to have something lined up for that champion. Right.
But MJF was in a predicament at one point in time in AEW where he was the most over guy, but he was not in title. He was like close to titleship pictures, but he wasn't yet. He still was going through his storylines, building to the point where he became a champion. I think Swerve still has maybe a storyline or two before he gets that title. I think I think they can put some matches together, and big name matches, like possibly they can still do a Ospreay versus this person at Wembley, or you know what I mean, like where I still think they can tell that story of MJF Adam Cole that they're kind of waiting on, and they're kind of waiting on Adam Cole's leg. And I think time frame wise, he should be close in a couple months.
Another thing, the MJF Adam Cole feud does not need the title. There's a personal issue with does not need the title.
Yeah,
it does not.
Yeah, I think Joe wins it. I think Joe turns his back on them when he asked them for it, and I think the reason he turns his back is that MJF comes back and he's like, "Bro, like this is."
So you think Wardlow wins? You mean?
I think Wardlow beats Joe, and then I think Wardlow drops it to a swerve.
Okay, that could happen. That could definitely happen. But my thought process here is using the title to elevate a guy, and you can do that. Not that Swerve isn't already elevated. He's the most over guy on the show.
And Wardlow's coming up on a contract, so I think they're trying to keep Wardlow happy and not lose Wardlow like they lost at Jade.
Does hey, we're gonna make you a transition champion, make him happy? Is the question. So some people want to be the champion. Some people just want to make sure they're in the mix and want to make sure they're being used properly. Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily. I don't know. It sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the title.
Yeah,
but what definitely does not need a title around it to be a big feud is when MJF comes back and goes after Adam Cole. That's been my big issue with the Bloodline thing this year is all the stuff with Roman and Jay in the SummerSlam main event. You did not need Roman to be the champion for that. Those losses he took in tag team matches. Roman only wrestles like 11 times a year. He's your champion. If he's going to wrestle at limited schedule, that's fine, but he should be defending that title every time he wrestles.
Well, you said something interesting last time too. You're like Wardlow. I mean, Roman could have still lost last year at Mania. We could still have the match we have this year.
Yep.
And the only thing that this year kind of accomplished for anybody was, not even accomplished, but the only thing you really did this year with this storyline before getting to where we are now is bury LA Knight.
The only thing Roman did with that title this year is bury LA Knight. Yeah, you did not. You could have even framed that Roman Jey Uso match at SummerSlam as meaning something more than the WWE title. This is about the leadership of the greatest family in wrestling. Yeah. And I mean, you still did that, but it didn't need the title attached to it. Roman losing a tag title match to Sami Zayn, Roman and Solo losing to the Usos did not need a title attached to it. The only time Roman being a champion even became relevant this year is when he wrestled LA Knight and when he when he did that 4-way that was kind of a throwaway match that nobody really remembers anything about at the Royal Rumble.
Yeah, totally.
And that is really a thing as far as I will die on the hill that Cody should have won last year. And I know a lot of very smart people disagree with that. If you look at like punditry and stuff like that, and a lot of the old school, except for the one guy, I don't want to even bring up his name, but Jim Cornette was the guy saying, "Yeah, Cody should have won." And this
I hate how much sometimes I agree with him. Through third party because I don't listen to him.
Yeah, he knows what he's talking about. But he can get a little out of touch. But forget about him. And this kind of ties all back to Swerve, where you have to be careful, and it really ties back to LA Knight. Because if you catch lightning in a bottle and you're saying, "Oh, we can wait, Swerve can get the title later," maybe that lightning dissipates.
Well, not only does it dissipate, but you put Cody in a situation where it took up time for the fans to turn and be cool. The golden baby face has a time shelf where they get sick of seeing him win all the time, and then the fans think it's cool to hate them.
Yeah,
and they did it with Hogan, they did it with Cena, they did it with Roman. Everyone had that where they get sick of seeing this guy win and sick of seeing this guy over, and then it becomes like it's cool to hate them. He hasn't even hit a stage where he could be the top baby face, and you already split your audience on him.
Mm-hmm. And there's an old saying, and it's very true. The crowd that shows up for your coronation is the same crowd that shows up for your funeral. People like a show.
Yeah, absolutely. So anything else storyline wise or wrestling wise we want to cover before we get into our topic?
Not on my end. I think obviously we're still marching toward the WrestleMania build. We're gonna have a little bit of clarity. It looks like very soon on the Intercontinental title picture. Does Brock figure into that if he's coming back? Because the original plan, by all indications, was Brock versus Gunther at Mania. Is that back on the books now that it seems like Brock is no longer excommunicated?
Yeah, it's weird. I feel uncomfortable a little bit talking about it, but like, what is Brock essentially? And I'm asking someone who I feel is smarter than me in this situation, but what is Brock blackballed for? Like, what is he excommunicated for?
Because he was one of the few people you could piece to put the puzzle pieces together, where unnamed executive number 1, a lot of people think it's Triple H, but we don't know. We know that when they're talking about the former UFC heavyweight champion who was renegotiating his contract in 2019, we know that's Brock.
Yeah.
And
this woman was told by Vince to send him content.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that.
He took the content and then said derogatory things, but in the context of like the kink, we'll say.
Maybe.
And then they were supposed to meet for a date, and it never happened.
Right.
So he was essentially offered the crime, but never did the crime.
It seems like it. It seems like it from that allegation. And
I'm not defending Brock. I still think Brock is probably a dirtball, but he didn't technically. Like, there's been people who have done way worse.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
I just don't think way worse.
Yeah, I don't think the crime fits the punishment because he didn't technically commit the crime.
The worst he can say is he may have allowed the promise of sexual favors from somebody to be a negotiating point in signing a new contract.
Sure, but like I can say, Brian, if you do next week's podcast, I'm gonna give there's gonna be a warehouse in New Jersey full of everything illegal in the world, and you agree, but you never walk into that warehouse and partake. You didn't do anything wrong.
That's true. That's true. But in this day and age, sometimes all you need is the intent. In this day and age, sometimes all you need is the intent.
It's an interesting conversation. I'm not defending either one way or the other. I'm just having the conversation to try to my brain to wrap around it.
Right. Do I think Brock is just as if all these accusations are true, if everything in that lawsuit is true, is Brock a tenth as evil as Vince McMahon? No.
Totally agree. All right, let's get into our history topic of the week. We are doing the history of Dick the Bruiser and Crusher.
All right, let's do it, you turkey necks.
I am the tavern champion. And
there's Crusher.
There's a lot that goes into it. You need to do the polka, you need to drink the beers, and smoke the cigars. All right, so the one video of the cigar in the pants. And here's the thing. As a kid, you didn't realize Mean Gene had a perverted sense of humor. So this cigar is hanging out of his pants, and Mean Gene's clearly like looking at it, and then looking at the camera, and then looking at it, and then looking at the camera. And you're like, we get it. It looks like a dick. But listen, if we're doing a Dick the Bruiser episode and Crusher episode, for these probably not both crazy Polacks, but some crazy Polacks, we got to drink a tavern beer here. You're going to crack a beer for tavern.
I am beerless at the moment. I'm drinking Diet Dr. Pepper tonight.
Well, you are a disgrace to our topic of the night.
And Polacks everywhere. I'm just kidding.
I do have a little bit of that in me as well. So
also, he said something very Schuylkill County, or something we associate with the Schuylkill County in one of his promos.
He said tree.
Tree
at him. Tree at him. One, two, tree.
Well,
one, two, tree.
The way he pronounces 3, yes, is very local to us.
I would say I'd never heard it that way until I moved to Pennsylvania. A couple 2 tree, and I'm like, what?
Well, that's also because Pennsylvania has been a very big melting pot for a lot. Like, as much as New York's like the melting pot of the world, Pennsylvania is like the melting pot of white culture.
The United States?
No, just like a melting pot of white culture. Like, all of our Schuylkill County towns were segregated, but like there was a section for the Germans, there was a section for the Polish, the Irish had a section, the Italians had a section, like, and everyone had their own grocery stores. Like, it was kind of like the movie Gangs of New York.
Like, the section of Pottsville I live in, like literally the hill I live on, and I'm going to use a term that is sometimes, not sometimes, it's not a super derogatory term, but the hill I live on is called by some people, I know the area is called like Bunker Hill. This specific hill I live on, because this was the Italian area, is called Guinea Hill.
Yeah, you can say that. Italian, you're allowed to say.
I don't even know what that means.
Guineas?
Sorry.
I'm Italian.
Italian
is a derogatory or racist, or it's not even race. It's a derogatory term that they call Italians. So Irish people were called mix.
Okay.
Yeah. Italians were guineas, or like Dago. Dago was a big one, right?
Yeah, that's probably the worst one.
That's the worst one. Yeah, but we're white. We can say it. It's
you're part Italian, I'm part Polak. We're all good.
Yeah. So
is this like I don't know if I'm comfortable partaking in this conversation, but is this the equivalent of like
If you want to say it's like saying the N
no,
word,
I wasn't
I
going
was
that
gonna
far.
say, 'cause it's
I'm
not
saying as
that.
a
No,
Hispanic. I'm
it's
saying as
not
a
that level.
Hispanic, as a Spanish woman, if someone called me a spick, I'm gonna be pissed off about it. But
It's in
if
the in the
but
it's
if
in the
like
same
if my
context.
cousin called me like, listen, you stupid spick, I'd be like, yo, like just slap you on the back of the head and walk on and
Sure.
continue with the conversation.
So essentially, just like most things in America and derogatory and negative stuff, and this is way off topic of our thing, but like that was the way of like
Is it like term of endearment? I guess is what I'm
no,
trying to
it was
ask. Or is
never.
this completely derogatory?
Later
Like
on,
this
it
isn't like
became a term of
Yeah.
endearment, like
Okay.
when people were allowed to be segregated, I guess, because even like segregation of white people was a thing. Like you didn't go to the Italian side's grocery store, or you didn't go to the Germans' church.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of how this entire area was set up.
right,
And at first it was used. Like if someone said, "Yo, you Mick," it was a fight.
right.
But then
Mhm.
later on, like you would have two guys at the firehouse and like, "Oh, there's my Mick friend," and everyone's like, "Oh, you're crazy bastard," you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and then
Yeah,
nobody.
that's what I guess that's
But at some point, it was a term to make you lesser
Yeah.
than what you were.
Yeah, at some point it was it was a slur that that a lot of groups took back, and and that level of like ethnic pride among white people typically isn't like for a specific ethnicity usually isn't as strong just now. Like I couldn't do it because I have a million things. Like I'm Irish, I'm Polish, I'm German, I'm like a million things. So
Yeah,
it's kind of tough.
yeah. But that all started because they said tree, and we were like,
Yeah.
"That sounds very
One
similar
full
here," because
tree.
we have a our area has a huge Polish background
Yeah.
as well.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's like a Polish. That's definitely a Polish thing, because the Crusher is pretty much inexorably linked to Milwaukee. He's from Milwaukee. There is a statue of the Crusher in Milwaukee. He is beloved. He was known as the man who made Milwaukee famous, and he did develop this character. So the character of the Crusher is very much a prototype version. He is the barroom brawler, and it's the same thing. It was like he's gonna train for his match by taking 2 kegs of beer. I'm gonna put him over each shoulder. I'm gonna run along the banks in
Eat mashed
Milwaukee.
potatoes,
I'm gonna eat some.
and instead of
mashed-
walking 1 block, I'm gonna walk a half a block.
Well, that was when he was getting ready for his bodybuilding contest, so he could show off his physique by drinking more. Instead of a case of beers, he's going to drink a case and a half of beer. He's going to eat a lot of Polish sausage and mashed potatoes, and instead of walking around the block, he's going to only walk half the block.
Yeah.
And then he's going to bulk up for his bodybuilding contest with Jesse Ventura,
Crazy.
or it might have been Superstar Billy Graham. But
Yeah.
the core of the gimmick, and a lot of those, like a lot of the clips I was sharing with you were like his older years. So that is when the Crusher they still bought him as a tough guy. They still bought him as like a top tier baby face. But he was a guy who came around every now and then, because at that point he was in the 80s, he was in his 50s. He was well into his 50s by that time.
In the
He was-
prime of his career in WWE.
Pretty much, because he was born in 1926. Was Reggie Lazowski, the Crusher. So yeah, he's almost 60 at the point he's back in there in the 80s, and he was a guy who was in the military. He had a little bit of a wrestling background, a little bit of a football background, but because of where he lived in the Great Lakes area, Milwaukee, Minnesota, Wisconsin. All the Dakotas, all that area was kind of the prime real estate of the AWA, Vern Gagne's AWA. And that was where he was probably the most over babyface in the AWA, but he was never the top babyface because that had to be Vern. This was partially part of that is Vern's ego, and part of that is the fact that Vern had that mindset of our champion should be a great technical wrestler, and that was not the Crusher's style. The Crusher was definitely a prototype of the Sandman or Steve Austin, even though Steve Austin, when he was stunning Steve, did a lot of technical wrestling. But the guy who
some of those punches he threw in that thing,
he was an old man at that point. He was getting toward the end of his run.
Yeah.
But his golden years were not even the 70s. It was like the 60s.
Yeah.
And into the early 70s. So he's a guy who was an established guy when people like Harley Race were coming up. And that's one of his signature feuds, especially when we're talking about him coming together with Dick the Bruiser. But he started wrestling, I believe, in the late 1940s. And I think he may have just been Reggie Lazowski. And then before he was the Crusher, he did have a brother tag team, not a real brother, with Stan Lazowski, who took his real last name. Lazowski is the Crusher's real last name. I believe Stan was Canadian, but they wrestled both sides of the border in the Great Lakes area, like Minnesota, Wisconsin, and in Canada as the Lazowskis. They won, I believe, the AWA tag team titles a few times. And then he became Crusher Lazowski just because somebody said he just crushes everybody. That was his thing. He was not gonna tie you up in the knots. He was not going to win the Olympic gold medal in freestyle wrestling. He was going to punch you in the mouth, and he could take everything you were going to throw at him. And he winds up meeting up with Dick the Bruiser. So let's jump tracks here. Let's talk about Dick the Bruiser. Dick the Bruiser was not so locked into Milwaukee. He was billed from Reno, Nevada. Maybe he's related to Ricky Price. Maybe Ricky Price is a distant ancestor of Dick the Bruiser. Who knows? But Dick the Bruiser, his real name was William Afflis, but a lot of people thought his real name was Dick, like Richard Afflis. And the Reno, Nevada thing comes because he did go to college there. He went to college in Reno at the University of Nevada, as they say there. I keep saying Nevada. They call it Nevada. And he wound up playing for the Green Bay Packers in the 1950s. For
Ricky Price also likes the Packers. Holy
yeah,
shit,
there you go.
Holy cow!
Ricky Price is maybe a descendant of Dick the Bruiser.
We're gonna start calling Ricky
Rick the Bruiser.
Rick the Bruiser.
There you go.
He's Rick the Bruiser.
Rick the Bruiser. Clip that.
So Dick the Bruiser played for the Green Bay Packers at a time that was not exactly their glory years of the 1960s, the Vince Lombardi years, or even before that, like the height of Curly Lambeau before the 40s or the 50s. So 1950 to 1954, like the best teams are teams now that, I mean, some of them are on the come up, but the best teams in football were teams like the Detroit Lions and the Cleveland Browns, because the Cleveland Browns had Otto Graham at that point, I think.
There's only like 4 teams in the NFL, so it wasn't hard to be able to see.
But the Packers were not one of the top ones at that point. And one of the kind of key things that happens here is that while he's playing, he was an offensive lineman, and he got hit in the throat. And that's why Dick the Bruiser had a real gravelly voice like this. I'm Dick the Bruiser, and it fits his character so well.
So it was a shoot voice.
Yeah, and he's a big man, especially for the time. He was billed as 6'1", 261, looked every bit of it. If you look at later Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher, they're a little heavier. They've aged a bit. They've got a little bit more of a midsection to them. But when they were at their heyday in the 50s and 60s, these guys are just big guys where, like, if you saw them at a bar, you would get away from them. Dick the Bruiser has been compared, and he didn't have the amateur bona fides of him by any chance, but just the way he looked, especially in comparison to the people of his time where everybody was a lot smaller, the early Dick the Bruiser gets a lot of comparisons to Brock Lesnar. If you go to Dick the Bruiser's Wikipedia page and they have like an 8x10 of him, the traps are popping, the neck is bulging, what neck there is, because the traps basically go up to his ears. And yeah, in the chat, exactly, he was the world's most dangerous wrestler. And that's why when David Letterman got the late night show on NBC after Johnny Carson, he called Paul Schaefer's band when it was on NBC was called the world's most dangerous band, because David Letterman grew up in Indiana. And anytime David Letterman would talk about wrestling, even when he had like Andy Kaufman on and stuff, he'd always say, "Oh, that's like big time wrestling." That was the name of Dick the Bruiser's TV show, because he ran Indiana.
Dude, Letterman is like, I that was one thing I've always liked about Letterman, like going back and relearning about him, is like I know wrestling podcasts and wrestling like this and wrestling journalism get a lot of shit. People say that we're not really journalists. We're not really, wrestling podcasters are lame and blah, blah, blah. But like, there wasn't a lot of people, even to like, now TKO is involved with it and they're a multi like media thing, but like even during like the 90s and the Attitude Era, like ESPN and major sports networks and newscasters didn't cover wrestling, and if they did, they insulted it. So like independent wrestling journalists is essentially what kept the word going of the magazines and like pre-internet the magazines and all that stuff. So like podcasting and stuff is just as important. Like it's a medium of talking their love about something that we want to grow. And like David Letterman was giving wrestling a national exposure that like wasn't being done.
Yeah, in the 80s was a little more. In the 80s was a little more. I think is accepted.
But everybody was still trying. It was still kind of like everyone was always trying to like be the one to break the news to everybody that it might not be real. Like
it's fake, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it was kind of like always like tongue in cheek if you talked wrestling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was a point in the 90s between like the peak of Hulkamania and the Attitude Era where you were looked down upon for liking wrestling.
Yeah.
I mean, some people still do look down upon wrestling. Just because they can't shake the idea that they think that people who enjoy wrestling think that it's a quote unquote legitimate sport, when the vast majority of the wrestling audience now knows the deal.
There you go. People who insulted wrestling weren't popular all over the world like ABJ and Gavin and Daddy Palmer are exactly correct, because I don't know if the news broke, if you see on the Instagram, but you're looking at Tornado Tag and ABJ and BP and ABJ are the #1 podcast in Taiwan right now.
Yes.
Yeah,
it had everything to do with us and nothing to do with
the fact that Tim Mingle, the folk singer, we used to live in Taiwan, and people know him, and his co-hosts and Pullbox Pals are from Taiwan. And just because they all listen to support him and we're still labeled a wrestling podcast, nothing to do with it. And we're not going to bring that up.
Absolutely not.
We are staking claim. Well, realistically, if they listen to that and then continue to listen and be like, yo, this pro wrestling, we could spark.
We could bring wrestling to Taiwan.
Yeah, because here's the deal. If we are the #1 podcast because they listen to a folk singer, no one's talking about wrestling in Taiwan.
This is going to lead to us bringing wrestling to Taiwan like Jim Barnett brought it to Australia. This is going to be great.
We are ground setting. And here's the deal. I don't give a shit if it's not legitimate. At the end of the day, this podcast has hit #1 in a country.
Yeah.
I'm taking it.
Definitely.
How do you say it?
Have you done that?
Correct me. No. Correct me if I'm wrong, though. Hasn't it actually made it in multiple countries, like onto
not
the list
#1.
at least? But
on the list, yes.
So you've made it in the list of how many countries now so far?
4.
So we're getting placed.
But #1.
But #1. So Taiwan is the first one.
First one.
So we need to add a Taiwan flag back here to
I believe for a moment we were #2 in Tanzania. But
Tanzania.
We were never
we were
#1.
killing it in Tanzania for a while. Yeah.
We need to
internationally known.
What country has those guys that wrestle in the dirt? They try to get them a ring. They have the ropes to do like really.
It's all mud.
I want to say it's Uganda, because I think I'd be the joke. Oh, did they learn from Kamala? But these guys are like legitimately from Uganda or live in Uganda. Anyway, back to Dick the Bruiser.
Steven Chambers says more #1 countries to go. Let's go. We're gonna get there. Has Jim Cornette ever been #1 in Taiwan? I don't think so.
Yeah, just the United States.
Just
nobody Google that. Check that.
Yeah, don't fact check.
Yeah, he may have been. We don't know. So Dick the Bruiser he played about 3 years for the Green Bay Packers, and then this is a time. The 1950s are a time, and even in the 60s and actually even the 70s, like before the players union got really strong, and that even into the 90s when free agency became a thing in the NFL. NFL players didn't make a whole lot of money. You made good money for the weeks that you played. Like you might have gotten paid like $300, $400 a week, which back in the 50s and 60s was good money. But you only that was your game check. And if you weren't playing a game that week and you played like 10, 11 games a year, you had to do something for the rest of the year. And a lot of football players wrestled. That's how Ernie Ladd got into wrestling. Ernie Ladd got into it. He would wrestle in the off season, and then he made a lot more money wrestling, so he became a wrestler. That's similar to what happened with Dick the Bruiser. He wasn't like a standout star football player, but he was a standout star wrestler. So he winds up becoming a wrestler, and he winds up under the tutelage and training of Vern Gagne, the head of the AWA, who we mentioned. We were talking about the Crusher. And they built him up pretty strong as just a guy who would run through people. And the first big match, one of the first big matches they set up for him, and he was slowly built up. He was probably, for a point in the late 1950s, early 1960s, one of the biggest heels in the country. And he would tour, he would travel. I think Steven mentioned it in the chat earlier, but he had a match in Madison Square Garden in 1957 where it was him and Dr. Jerry Graham against Edouard Carpentier and Antonino Rocca, who was pre-Buddy Rogers and Bruno Sammartino. Rocca was the biggest star in the Northeast. He was huge. And to this day, one of the most over tag teams in the history of professional wrestling was Antonino Rocca and Miguel Perez Sr. So they had a match that kind of went over the actual confines of the match, and they just had a brawl after. It's something we consider probably relatively tame by today's standards. They just brawled after the match, and it turned into a riot, and a couple of cops got hurt, and a couple of kids got hurt. And for a time, and I think it was lifted fairly quickly. I think it was lifted.
Were any of those kids in kitten masks?
No.
Okay.
I think it was lifted fairly quickly, but Dick the Bruiser was banned for life by the New York State Athletic Commission, which just feeds into this idea that he's the world's most dangerous wrestler. Banned in New York, even when the ban was lifted, he's banned in New York. And there was, I believe this was also, I could be mistaken here, I believe this was also part of the reason that for the longest time, children under 14 were not allowed in the wrestling at Madison Square Garden.
Oh, I think in the ring.
No. They're still not allowed in the ring in New York or Pennsylvania. But the big thing there was it's just reinforcing this image of Dick the Bruiser as a guy who is dangerous, as a guy who, you don't know what he's going to do. You don't know who he's going to go after, and that's something that even lived on in like a Bruiser Brody or somebody, like, where fans believed that Dick the Bruiser was real. Like, everybody thinks that the idea that before Hulkamania, before Vince McMahon, that everybody thought wrestling was legit. People had questions, and it was in the newspaper. People had questions about the legitimacy of wrestling in like the 1920s.
Yeah,
and maybe before that.
Like, here's the deal. Just because we watched it in the late 80s, 90s, when it was popular on television, like, if you go back and watch old wrestling and you've been in a real fight or you've seen real combat, you're looking at some things and you're like, that didn't look real.
That
like,
Irish whip, I don't know if that's on the up and up.
Yeah, you're like, how come when I get to a fight, how come I can't just throw the guy and he'll keep running? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, there's aspects of wrestling that you're like that. Like, why doesn't he just move when he's going to jump off the top rope? He's staring right at him.
I don't think a lot of people were jumping off the top rope in the 40s.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But like, it's been there. Like, I don't know. What do you think? How do you think wrestling would have been perceived if they just said from the jump that, like, hey, we're doing choreographed stunt fights?
I don't think it would have worked, because I think people to this day, I think this is the case for a lot of people. I think people like knowing the idea or like being able to suspend their disbelief. And I think sometimes wrestling now goes too far into its entertainment, because it makes it harder to suspend your disbelief. Movies are, everybody knows movies aren't real, but at the end of Endgame, Robert Downey Jr. and Josh Brolin aren't seen shaking hands and saying, hey, wasn't it fun to shoot that movie? And oh, look, it's just a show. I'm not really Thanos. I'm not really Iron Man.
Yeah.
Captain America's not really dead. Chris Evans is over here. You can be predetermined. You can be a highly athletic form of storytelling and not rub people's noses in it.
Yeah.
Give them a chance to it's not that they're going to really believe, but give them a chance to suspend their disbelief and to not be taken out of it. And that's where the reality of it really sinks in. And that's where a guy like part of the appeal of Brock Lesnar is that people know like Brock Lesnar really could beat everybody. Like Brock Lesnar is really that tough and really is that dangerous. It really could rip somebody's head off. It really is a legit MMA fighter and a legit NCAA heavyweight champion. Kurt Angle is an Olympic gold medalist. So the fact there is still something to there is still a benefit to somebody being perceived as real. That is not gone. So I don't think being too forward, unless it's going to be part of your brand, unless it's like Chikara or like a Lucha Underground, where we're going to go to another level here and we're going to just add even more fanciful storytelling elements of it. But at that point, it's less pro wrestling and more an action movie. It's an action movie with long wrestling scenes, basically.
Yeah.
So with Dick the Bruiser, that legitimacy was really there, and he worked hard toward it. One of his big feuds in Detroit, and Detroit wound up being a big part of his territory because he becomes a promoter too, and generally not a very good one. So he had Detroit as part of his territory, and he co-promoted with Gagne. It was under that AWA umbrella, but Gagne's territory was huge because Gagne's territory ran from like Detroit to Denver. It was big. And so part of it, the Dick the Bruiser part, was the WWA, and it was mainly Detroit, and they would run Chicago sometimes with their other promoters in and out of Chicago. Fred Kohler was a big one, the most successful one in that territory, I guess, until nowadays, with like Tony Khan running there a lot, and then WWE, and it was Detroit, Indianapolis, Chicago was kind of Dick the Bruiser's stomping grounds, and Detroit became a point of contention. We'll talk about in a second. So Dick the Bruiser had an angle with another ex-football player who's a more famous ex-football player, Alex Karras. Alex Karras was he played for the Detroit Lions, and he was very well liked. I think became an announcer. Alex Karras also became a very successful actor. If you've ever seen the movie Blazing Saddles, Alex Karras played Mongo. And if you've ever seen the TV show Webster, he was the adoptive father of Webster.
Have you tried to watch Blazing Saddles on like HBO Max or anything yet?
I have it on DVD. I have a Mel Brooks collection.
I put it on the other day, a couple months ago, to like watch it because I was like, I'll watch this movie. It's been a long time. They have like a 45-minute like mini documentary before the movie starts to like explain to you that you're going to hear and see really suggestive things that like in today's time isn't very good. Like I was like, what? Just play the movie. Like
if you watch Blazing Saddle, and this is not an original thought of mine. This is what I actually found and shared on my own social media, like because the anniversary of Blazing Saddles just came out. If you watch the movie Blazing Saddles and the biggest thing you take away from it is it's funny to say racial stuff, you didn't understand. You didn't understand the point of the movie. Saddles. Yes. The point of Blazing Saddles is all these racists are being outsmarted by the one black guy who has the balls to stand up to the guy that they're all afraid of.
Pretty much. Yep.
That's Blazing Saddles in a nutshell.
It's kind of like when people when you talk to somebody about like Rick and Morty, you're like, I love Rick and Morty. I'm like, do you like the fart jokes or do you get the deeper meaning? Like,
but that's the same with Beavis and Butthead, with South Park.
Yeah,
it's always been the same thing. But yeah, I have the Mel Brooks collection on Blu-ray, and Blazing Saddles is part of it. So
now I want to watch I want to watch a Mel Brooks movie tonight.
I am always very partial also to Spaceballs. I love Spaceballs.
Ron, I think we just found. Oh, actually, we found two now. We're gonna do Tarantino and Mel Brooks.
Mel Brooks.
Yeah.
So Alex Karras was another one of those football players that would occasionally wrestle, and they wanted to set up a thing with Alex and Dick the Bruiser. So they do this instead of like doing an angle on TV. I don't even know if they had TV at this point. They did. Like wrestling was one of the first things on TV in the 50s, but they're going to do an angle at Alex Karras's bar, which is owned by Alex Karras and two brothers that he was friends with. And they were going to do a work thing where Dick the Bruiser and Alex Karras are going to get into a fight at the bar. but they didn't smarten up the partners or their family. So the uncles of the two brothers that were partners with Alex Karras, when they saw Dick the Bruiser going after Alex, went after him, and it very quickly turned into a real fight. Police were called. The bar was destroyed. A few police officers were injured. A lot of patrons were injured. Dick the Bruiser was put in jail for a little bit, and it was wild. It was wild.
Steven Chambers is a knowledgeable wrestling. One of these episodes, we're going to bring Steven Chambers in. I think you'd be very impressed with Steven.
Yeah.
With a lot of his knowledge. He's very, very good. And this is like his wheelhouse. He loves old school wrestling.
And then we had, as I said, Dick the Bruiser became a promoter. It was around this time Dick the Bruiser became a promoter because that Detroit area, Detroit, Indianapolis, and some other areas there were being run by Jim Barnett and his crew. And Jim Barnett at this point was going to Australia to start professional wrestling there. The original World Championship Wrestling was in Australia, and it was Jim Barnett's thing. So Dick the Bruiser got part of the territory, and then the Sheik, the original Sheik, Ed Farhat, took Detroit by force. So Dick the Bruiser had pretty much Chicago in tandem with Vern. He was running Indianapolis on his own, and there was a bit of a fight over Detroit. The Sheik wanted it. Dick the Bruiser wanted it. The Sheik was a much better promoter than Dick the Bruiser, though. And it wound up being a thing where the Sheik started putting his TV on in Dick the Bruiser's markets in Chicago and Indianapolis. And Vern Gagne wanted nothing to do with going toe to toe with with the Sheik. He wanted the Sheik. You can have Detroit Sheik. Don't mess with Chicago. Don't mess with Indianapolis. Don't mess with Minnesota or Milwaukee, because they're all mine. Yeah. Dick the Bruiser's just here sometimes as a wrestler. So that kind of ended the feud. And the Sheik was winning anyway. Dick the Bruiser just never wanted to give up. But it wound up being that they wound up working with each other. They wound up doing matches together. Like the Sheik's biggest rival was Bobo Brazil. And there was a match. There was a match with Bobo Brazil and Dick the Bruiser against the Sheik and Bobby the Brain Heenan. And the funny thing about that,
a wrestler, right?
Yeah, Bobby was a wrestler who would manage. So
there's not a lot of footage though of Bobby in ring as a wrestler, right?
He wrestled quite a bit he wrestled at like WrestleMania. We saw WrestleMania 5, but he wrestled at WrestleMania.
No, I'm saying
4.
like not when he was like the chicken shit manager getting his ass kicked.
Yeah.
Like, actual footage of Bobby like in his prime wrestling.
No, because he didn't wrestle a whole lot. Usually he wrestled as a manager. He was a manager that would wrestle frequently.
I gotcha.
Because he was pretty good at it. He and his
great bump. He could take a bump. He was a really good bumper.
Yeah, he always said my whole thing was I wrestle like a manager and manage like a wrestler. So if it was with it being Dick the Bruiser and Bobo Brazil against Sheik and Heenan, Heenan's there to eat the pin. I don't know that for sure, but I guarantee you Heenan's there to eat the pin.
Yeah.
But the funny thing about that is the Sheik always had a manager, because the Sheik's whole gimmick, and we could do a whole episode on the Sheik, maybe we will someday. And his whole gimmick, the Sheik was really of Middle Eastern descent, but he was born and raised in the United States. He was born and raised in the Detroit area. He was a Christian. He was, but his whole thing was his gimmick, and he never really got nationalism. He was never like death to America or anything like that. Yeah. Even when anti-Middle East sentiment grew, like during the Iranian hostage crisis and stuff. His whole thing was he was supposed to be from this rich, old money Arabian family. And he was the wild child of the family who was too crazy to be over there. So they sent him to America to get it out of his system and be crazy over here. And he would always have a handler. He would have Princess Amayola, who was his actual wife, who was sometimes his second. The most famous person he had as his manager was Abdullah Farouk, who would later leave Detroit and go on to the WWF and become the Grand Wizard. Ernie Roth. So, and after Ernie Roth left to become the Grand Wizard, he would have people in and out. He had the original Brain. Eddie the Brain Creechman was the original manager called the Brain. And he would manage the Sheik a lot in Detroit because I think he was out of Quebec, and it wasn't that big of a travel thing to go from Quebec to Detroit. But when the Sheik would travel more, Eddie Creechman didn't want to travel with him because he had a lot of legit business in Quebec. So sometimes Heenan would manage the Sheik, sometimes Gary Hart would manage the Sheik, sometimes whoever they could get would manage the Sheik at points. And the time that Sheik and Bobby Heenan teamed, Eddie Creechman was their manager, so you had Bobby the Brain in the match and Eddie the Brain on the outside. So Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher kind of come together in the AWA and the NWA, or the AWA and the WWA, and they get a lot of tag team title reigns between both of them. But their big feud, the one that kind of puts them on the map and turns the Crusher babyface. We're going to flip back to the Crusher a bit now. The thing that turns the Crusher very much a babyface is the fact that he was in this big feud. Him and the Bruiser were in a big feud with the number one heel tag team in the AWA in the early to mid 1960s, which was, and if you know what these guys look like, it's weird to think of this. They were the pretty boy flamboyant, like almost like a Shawn Michaels of their day. Handsome Harley Race and pretty boy Larry Hennig, who was Kurt Hennig's father, who would later, as people realize maybe he's not that much of a pretty boy, be Larry the Axe Hennig. But they were Handsome Harley and pretty boy Larry, and the Crusher and Dick the Bruiser, and then unfortunately we would have to say that a lot of this stuff did have very homophobic overtones. It's like that they were sissies, they were not real men, and they would call Harley Race and Larry Hennig the Dolly sisters instead of their actual names. But that was like a huge feud, and it really was something that kind of primed Harley Race especially to be the 6-7-time NWA World Champion he wound up becoming. But that was
what always blew my mind with Harley Race is like, one of the things you don't really like, there wasn't a lot of in pro wrestling, especially back in the day, was tattoos.
Yeah.
Not a lot of guys had tattoos. Harley Race, like, had not just like one on the arm, like he had forearm tattoos. Like,
yeah, well, the main one was the one on the forearm. That was like the big one for him. Yeah. Yeah, that was rare. Yeah, there they go. Handsome Harley and pretty boy Larry right there. So, yeah, I mean, back then, to use the old joke, yeah, tattoos are for sailors and loose women. That was the idea.
Yeah. Like, Harley was kind of different back then when it came to the tattoo game. Like,
yeah, he was. That was a rarity. Like, a lot of, like, and a lot of, like, men with tattoos was usually, like, people who were in some kind of, like, gang or the military.
Yeah.
At that point. And I don't know if Harley was in the military. I don't think he was, because I know the way Harley Race got into wrestling was there were two old school, like the teens and the 1920s wrestlers, Stanislaus and Wladek Zabisco, and they were like old school. Like if Dick the Bruiser is the prototype for Brock Lesnar, then Stanislaus Zabisco is the prototype for Dick the Bruiser, except he was actually a legit wrestler too. He wasn't like a football player, it was a brawler. He was a trained wrestler. He was like a guy who could snap you in half.
That'd be a fun topic. Our favorite tattoos in wrestling.
Tony Storm and Deonna Purrazzo's before they got covered up.
The tattoos.
The tattoos.
The Pepsi logo. Now I'm very unique because I'm one of the few people in wrestling that doesn't have tattoos.
Yeah, you're old school.
I'm very old school. Yeah. So that's how Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher kind of link up as a tag team, and they team pretty regularly there for a while. But Dick the Bruiser would focus more on Indiana, and the Crusher until the very end never really strayed too far from the AWA. He did have some AWA title reigns. He was a 3-time AWA champion. Twice he'd beat Vern Gagne for it. He was never champion that long though. He was champion for like a few weeks here and there. And they always say it was that Vern Gagne maybe even been a little jealous that the Crusher was a bit more popular than he was. There was a little bit of jealousy about Dick the Bruiser, the Crusher being the fan favorite, even though Vern Gagne was this great wrestler, almost went to the Olympics.
Was Vern a good mic guy?
Not like the Crusher. Vern Gagne was very matter of fact. Vern Gagne was very straight laced, right down the middle.
Well, that's why Crusher dominated them, because Crusher was funny on the mic.
Not
funny, but he was entertaining.
Crusher was definitely a personality. He was more of what would later be known as a sports entertainer, where Vern Gagne's whole thing was he's a legit wrestler. he was the owner, so he was always positioned as the top star, and everything.
So
was
that
kind of
was
built
actually a
around him.
conversation. That professional wrestling and sports entertainer are one and the same. That term means the same thing, and I was like, not necessarily. Like I guess when we were trying to find out examples of how one is different than the other, and that's a great example. Like Vern Gagne is a professional wrestler. Crusher was a sports entertainer of his time. Like you can be a kick-ass dude in the ring and do amazing technical moves and ground games and grapple and do all that technicality stuff, which is more deemed of the pro wrestler. And then your high flyers and everything like that broke that mold, was almost like that sports entertainer thing. But even if you weren't good at either one of those, if you can be on the mic good enough to do something in the ring, you were deemed more of a sports entertainer than you were a wrestler. And then and that was kind of something that was like, well, we can push you to be a sports entertainer, even though you're not a good pro wrestler. Like, I don't know. It's a weird terminology there.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing where it's what is your strong suit? What do you like? R-Truth is he's a competent wrestler. I'm not saying he's a bad wrestler.
Yeah,
But
he's good.
He's an entertainer. He's an entertainer. The Miz is a very competent wrestler. He's a very underrated wrestler. He's an entertainer. That's what his base is. Even so, I'll go further to say somebody like CM Punk. CM Punk is a personality, and he's a very good wrestler. I have CM Punk matches I love. They're some of my favorite matches ever. CM Punk is an entertainer. Roddy Piper is an entertainer. I'm talking about people who do have the bona fides of being like good quote unquote workers.
Yeah.
But what really brings them to the dance, what really sells them is their personality.
Yeah. And that's kind of where Sean coined, like when he said, when the term sports entertainer became a thing, that's why Sean said, I'm going to be the best damn sports entertainer in this business because I can wrestle, but I can also carry myself in the mic and be a character and put myself over the top. And that's what kind of split the audience between him and Brett, because Brett was that old school pro wrestler where he wasn't as good on the mic. And every time him and Sean stepped in the ring as wrestlers, Brett was the better wrestler, but Sean would outdo him on the mic skills.
I always thought Sean was a smidge overrated on the mic. Great character work, great personality. I always thought he was like a little bit overrated on the mic.
Yeah. He knew what to say and how to get it done.
No, he wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination, but he was never on the level of like, well, around that time, you didn't really have a guy like that in WWF. But like Mick Foley is incredible on the mic. Steve Austin, The Rock, John Cena, people of that ilk. Shawn Michaels is like maybe a rung below them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. What was your question, Lily?
You pretty much said what I was gonna. What I was getting at was, would you say that someone is better at sports entertainment if they're not necessarily like, we'll say that. So, for instance, you were saying Bret Hart is more technical, where Shawn Michaels has more of the personality and the characteristics and can speak behind a mic. So, I don't know, on everyone, but would you say that like sports entertainers are more people who, if you took wrestling out of it altogether, The Rock, John Cena, people who go on to Hollywood and things like that and can still do the entertainment without the sport?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Whereas a wrestler, if you take out the sport, there is no entertainment.
Bret Hart's not starring in a movie.
Right. That's what I mean. Like, if you take out the sport, there is really no entertainment. Like the sports is what makes them the wrestler.
He was on The Simpsons.
He was on Lonesome Dove, the series as well. And he played a genie in a stage production of Aladdin.
No, he didn't.
Yes, he did.
I am Googling Bret Hart as the genie in
This is
Aladdin.
fantastic. See that? So
I'm gonna grant you 3 wishes.
Was it entertaining? But was it entertaining?
If you don't think Bret Hart can be entertaining, you need to watch the promo he does about El Dandy. Yes. Yeah. He's a great wrestler.
I will honestly say this. I think, regardless of how much they disliked each other, that, oh my God, this is not it, is it?
With the harem pants?
Yeah, where he has...
Does he have like rainbow
It's gotta
pants?
It's gotta
and
be.
A vest?
I think there's I don't think there's 2 instances of Bret Hart dressing up as a genie, so it's gotta be.
This is amazing.
Bret, I think Shawn Michaels brought the best out of Bret on the mic.
They brought the best out of each other, yeah.
Exactly, yeah, 100%. And
Steve Austin and Bret worked really well together too. That is Bret Hart and Aladdin, yes.
Jesus.
There is.
You listen here, Aladdin, you stinking hyena. I'm gonna get you 3
It-
wishes.
It was street rat. Okay. Street rat.
But Brett's line was stinking hyena.
Oh, okay. That's fair. That's fair.
I'm gonna
I didn't
grant
know
you
that. My
3
bad.
wishes, and if you use one of those wishes against Bill Goldberg, you get 3 more.
He just goes walking out as a
Yeah.
genie.
That's how he comes out of the lamp with his hands out.
I need video footage of Bret Hart speaking as the genie. That's fucking amazing.
So as far as the end of their careers with Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher, Dick the Bruiser's age caught up with both of them. They were still around, but Dick the Bruiser kind of, once the territory thing was over, he would still come out of retirement every now and then. Even in late in the AWA run around like 83, 84, he would. There's a famous match with him, somewhat famous. It was, I think, at Comiskey Park in Chicago. But it was him, Dick the Bruiser, it was Bruiser, Crusher, and Baron von Raschke, who was like an old rival, against the Russians. It was Ivan Koloff, Nikita Koloff, and Crusher Khrushchev, who would go on to be smashed from Demolition. And they had a big match today. I want to say it was Comiskey Park in Chicago. It may have been in Detroit. Oh wait, Comiskey Park is, I don't remember. I'm not good with old baseball stadiums. He was either in Chicago or Detroit or the baseball stadium. Dick the Bruiser was also in a lot of TV commercials in Indianapolis. He wound up being a color commentator for Glow for a little bit. The Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. Because I guess the guy who started Glow and is still involved with like WOW now, Women of Wrestling, David McLean, was from Indiana and was a big Dick the Bruiser fan. And he winds up, one of his last on-camera things was at Starrcade 1990, because he wound up being like a backstage guy for WCW. He was the referee for Starrcade 90 in an infamous and not very good match between Sting, who was at that point the WCW champion, and his rival of all of 1990, the Black Scorpion, who came down in a spaceship that looks like it was made for like a 5th grade school play. And he comes out in his Scorpion outfit, and boy, do you know he looks like Ric Flair. Boy, do you know he looks like Ric Flair. And it wasn't always meant to be Ric Flair. This is one of those things where they booked an angle without knowing how they wanted to end it, where Sting, when in his first run as champion, was kind of haunted, or he was terrorized by, and this could be another episode, well, not a whole episode, so maybe it's good as a side tangent. The Black Scorpion kind of threatened Sting, like, Sting, it was like a man from Sting's past. They made you almost want to think it was the Ultimate Warrior, even though there was no way they were getting the Ultimate Warrior.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ole Anderson, it's funny, we're going to be talking about him next week. Ole Anderson was the booker at this time, and he was also the voice of the Black Scorpion. He would just do the voiceover. And I guess he wanted Angel of Death, who actually did play the Black Scorpion at points, but nobody really knew who Angel of Death was, so it wouldn't have been a big reveal. They had nowhere to go with this thing, so they'd have Sting wrestle different guys as the Black Scorpion on TV and on Clash of the Champions and on house shows. It's like 10 different guys play the Black Scorpion. He would do like magic tricks. Like he would grab a plant out of the crowd. Like this plant would act like they were terrified. He would just grab somebody, throw them in a cage, and turn them into a tiger. Or he would take a fan out of the crowd and put them in a chair and put them. Do you ever see the magic thing where they put the thing over the person's head? It's like a box and they twist it around, so like they're twisting their head around. He would do that to a fan. And
in the middle of a match.
No, it would be like he would be doing this to taunt Sting. He would be like just doing this to try to get in this.
This is
head.
why I did not fuck with WCW.
This is not the best of WCW. So, like any other time that WCW did something really stupid and they had to fix it, I guess we gotta get Rick out to get us out of it this time, and that's what they did. That was the good thing about WCW. No matter how bad things went, no matter how bad the booker this week screwed it up, in case of emergency, break that glass. Here comes Ric Flair, and everything's okay.
Do you think that's kind of like AEW, where you're like, all right, the booking's not strong, but goddamn, we have some of the best wrestlers in the world, so just have them go wrestle?
Yeah, to a degree, yeah.
Because you can't fuck up a match when you have that roster. Like, if you put a match together pay-per-view, it's going to be fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, but maybe the story build-up's not the strongest.
Right. And and it wasn't. I think AW's bigger thing is like there isn't really a story. Where sometimes WCW's error was the story was bad. And
Yeah.
I don't know which is worse. I don't know which is worse, to be honest.
We talk more about the bad though. It's still like
now the Black Scorpion. You can look back at it. That was stupid. You can look back at it and laugh. You can look back at the Black Scorpion. And I think it's looked back on with more of a WCW, where people are gonna look back at the Devil storyline and be like, what were they doing?
I gotta step away 1 second. Can you carry?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
So with the Crusher's end is a little bit different than the Dick the Bruiser's end. He did wrestle a little bit later, quasi full-time. He was definitely not a full-time wrestler. He was one of the guys that made the jump when Vern Gagne had the big war with Vince McMahon. If you don't know a lot about Vince McMahon's initial reach out into the territories with going national and things like that, the first territory that got rated hard by Vince McMahon was the AWA. They took not everybody. They didn't take Nick Bockwinkel, obviously. They didn't take Vern, but they took Bobby Heenan from the AWA. They took Mean Gene Okerlund from the AWA. They took Hulk Hogan from the AWA. They took Jesse Ventura. They took Adrian Adonis. They took Jim Brunzell. They took Jim Brunzell was Greg Gagne, Vern Gagne's son's tag partner. They took a lot of people from the AWA. It's almost a lot of their identity. And what the old trick that Vince would do when he was running shows against people in their territory, like if he stole, case in point, he steals. This is on an old Hulk Hogan like Hulkamania tape. He steals Gene Okerlund and Jesse Ventura and Hulk Hogan, and now they're in the WWF. So when they go to run in Minnesota, I think the original plan, the big thing they were setting up was that was later. Sean and Marty would have been around like 88.
Yeah.
Well, they were there. They were such head cases behind the scenes. They were so out of control. They got fired, and they brought them back. But a little later,
allegedly.
No. There's
John says what happened in that bar, I didn't do. He goes, I did a lot of things. I didn't do what they accused me of in that bar. That night.
It wasn't just that. It was just like these guys. These guys party too much. We got to cut them loose. And then they brought him back, and they still party too much. So,
but one was Shawn Michaels.
But Marty Jannetty is a damn good wrestler too. Let's not sell Marty Jannetty short.
Marty's fucking crazy.
Yes, he is. So but that was a little later when they took Shawn and Marty, they took Kurt Hennig, they took Mr. Perfect. That was a little bit later on in the process. But that first wave of like 84, 85 was Dr. D. David Schultz. It was Steve Austin, Hulk Hogan. They took Steve Austin in the 80s. That'd be surprising. They'd be taking Lee Majors. It was Gene Okerlund, Bobby Heenan. They took a lot of people to the point where like now it's just Nick Bockwinkel and Rick Martel are your main guys in the AWA because Vern's kind of retired at that point. And one of the people they took, but he wasn't going to be a full-time guy, was the Crusher. The Crusher finishes up with the WWF, and he finishes up only really wrestling when they were coming through those towns. They were coming through Milwaukee, Minnesota, or Minneapolis, St. Paul, Chicago, Detroit, like places where the Crusher name really meant something because he was very much a regional star. He didn't He traveled more early in his career.
In today's terms, this is kind of like, okay, we'll hire you. You're not going to be our national touring guy, but when we're in your hometown, we're going to make you look like a star. And then in today's terms, like we're in Cleveland this week, Miz, time for your time to shine. Because that's like historically what we do in wrestling.
Right. It's hard to really correlate it to anything now just because wrestling on that level is a national business.
Yeah.
But it's like if, say, GCW goes somewhere, they're going to probably get a local guy. Like if GCW's running Texas, they're probably, he's in AEW now, they're probably going to get like a Brian Keith. If they're running California, they're going to get a lot of the Hood Slam people like Dark Sheik. Yeah. And they'll bring people in too, but wrestling now on a national scale is so different than that day, where even when WWF was doing a national expansion, they were fighting a bunch of regional wars. So that match I was talking about, and it's on the like one of those Hulkamania tapes they had, the match itself was Hulk Hogan and Gene Okerlund wrestled. It might have been the only match Mean Gene ever wrestled, but it's Hogan and Mean Gene against Mr. Fuji and Georgie Animal Steel, because Gene Okerlund was the announcer for all those years. Everybody knew Gene Okerlund, so they had him in the thing. And then the end of the match, it sets up Hogan and Jesse Ventura.
Yeah.
So the Crusher would be around there.
Good
And
promos for that match leading up to, like Mean Gene trying to drink the eggs.
The eggs,
and, like,
yeah.
working out and like.
And they're doing the thing where like Hulk's running up the steps in the bleachers in the stadium
And
with
Mean Gene smoking.
No, yeah, but they're doing a thing where like Hogan's running up the bleachers with Mean Gene on his back, and then Mean Gene has to try to do it with Hogan on his back, and he can't.
Yeah,
it was
funny.
Fun.
It was good,
fun.
bro. It was good bit.
It was fun, and they had this gimmick called the Machines. The whole thing was right before Andre the Giant turned heel, and they did a thing where he got suspended for attacking Bobby Heenan, and it was so Andre could go film The Princess Bride, I think, or something else. Or he just needed time off because he was breaking down at that point. So they did a thing where they had this group called the Machines. There was Big Machine, I think Super Machine, and Giant Machine. And it was the Midnight Rider gimmick. It was very clearly Andre the Giant, who, if you've ever heard Andre the Giant, he has a very distinctive voice, under a mask talking about how he's a Japanese man who is finally coming to the World Wrestling Federation. And then the other machines were Demolition Axe, before he was Demolition Axe, Bill Eadie, who was a mass superstar, and Blackjack Mulligan, who is Bray Wyatt's grandfather, Barry Windham's father.
Yeah.
But it wasn't always Giant Machine because Andre couldn't wrestle full time. So sometimes it would be Piper Machine, and it would be Roddy Piper under the mask. It would be Hulk Machine. It would be a bunch of different things. And when they were in, say, Milwaukee, sometimes it was Crusher Machine, and the Crusher would be one of the machines.
That's awesome.
So and so they do. I think I had it here. It was in my notes. The very last match the Crusher has that we know of was a tag team match where he teamed up with Ken Patera as a replacement for Billy Jack Haynes against Demolition, and Demolition lost by DQ. His last TV appearance, I actually saw the Crusher live once, not wrestle, but I actually saw the Crusher live once, and this is related to Dick the Bruiser too. So I was at Slamboree 94, which was a WCW pay-per-view. It was the first pay-per-view I was ever at. And Slamboree, for the first few years, it was a pay-per-view. It was the Legends reunion show. They would do like a Legends match or a few Legends matches on the show. They would induct people into the WCW Hall of Fame. This was the second Slamboree, and like the only Legends match was Terry Funk and Tully Blanchard, and it was part angled because Terry Funk came back later and turned heel. But they inducted some people into the WCW Hall of Fame. One of the people they inducted, one of the people they inducted the Hall of Fame that was there that night was Vern Gagne, and another was the Crusher. And they also inducted Dick the Bruiser, and the Crusher accepted on behalf of Dick the Bruiser, and he even does a promo at that show with Mean Gene Okerlund. At Slamboree 94 would be a fun show to revisit. It's a pretty good show. It's a pretty good show, and we're coming up. It would be a good show to cover maybe in May, because it'll be the 30th anniversary of it. And I was there. Right. We can cover another pay-per-view I was at.
All right.
That'll be fun.
All right, I'm with it.
And then his final appearance was at WWF Over the Edge 1998, which is actually the Over the Edge pay-per-view before the one in 1999 when Owen Hart passed away. But in the front row was, and I don't know where exactly they held this, but it must have been in like Milwaukee or something. It was in Milwaukee. So the Crusher and Mad Dog Vachon, who was one of his biggest longtime rivals, were front row. And Mad Dog Vachon was the one where they had the fake leg that Diesel ripped off and tried to hit Shawn Michaels with it. And Jerry Lawler was still the heel color commentator there. So Lawler comes over to them, makes fun of how old they are, and he tries to steal Mad Dog's leg, but Mad Dog Vachon takes off the leg and hits Lawler with it instead. And then Crusher gives him the big bolo punch. And there's a big pop because the Crusher knocked out one more guy in Milwaukee. And unfortunately, Dick the Bruiser did pass much earlier than the Crusher. That's why he wasn't there for that Hall of Fame induction. He passed away in 1991. And and he was, I believe, in his 60s. I believe he was 62 when he passed. And then the Crusher passed at 79 of brain cancer in 2005.
Yeah, they're very, very fun characters. Very, very great topic. Thank you guys in the chat. That was an episode that you guys have requested, and you guys picked a good one. Did Brian do a good job in his research and presentation? I always love learning about new things. And
I did a lot of research. I went to the saloon. I had a few beers.
He went down in Pilgrim. He had a couple Irish. He got a little Polish sausage, and then he went and drank a bunch of beers.
I had
a
IPAs.
couple.
I had
teachers.
3 beers. I had a Polish sausage, and then I danced with the dollies.
How many beers are you drinking next Saturday?
I have no idea. Ooh, next week might be a very subdued BP Berg because we do the show late, so I should be okay. I should be
So
clear
they're
then.
giving away free beer like 2 blocks away from BP's house.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Was Ole
Yeah.
Anderson a big drinker?
Every pro wrestler's a big drink.
I
Can
you know
we tie it in? Can we
actually
tie it in?
actually you know who was not a big drinker? The Crusher.
Not Ole Anderson.
The
The Crusher. I don't know about Ole Anderson, but the Crusher for real. Baron von Raschke, who was a good friend of his, who was an AWA mainstay, did a shoot interview. Was like, yeah, the Crusher didn't drink a lot, and he didn't drink beer. He would have a glass of wine every now and then, but no, he like Reggie Lazowski, the man, was not a big beer drinker.
That's awesome.
Interesting. See that?
It's like Punk coming out being like, I bang heroin. He's like straight edge his whole life.
But yeah, so yeah, that was just a gimmick. It was just
Free-basting
the Crusher being that guy, that ideal like barroom brawler from Milwaukee.
Yeah, he sits at home and reads books and classical music and drinks a glass of wine. But all right, man. Let's real quick before we get out of here. 5 questions with ABJ. New one drops tomorrow with Ronnie Moses of the Security Inc. We have the episode right now. Blink-182 One More Time is my first ever in 6 years solo podcast doing a review of an album. Go check it out. Timmy Mingle's episode that made us #1 in Taiwan is out right now. You can go check that
was
one
all
out.
us. That had nothing to do with Tim.
Yeah, F you, Tim. Wasn't you. Go and also go support Poolbox Pals. Great podcast. Brian can probably smash out his bedroom window from where he's at right now. We just did the Bruiser and Crusher, which will be available on all podcast platforms here in a moment. If you do listen to the podcast, we are live. We're live on YouTube, which we are growing on. Also Facebook, Twitch, and X. And I hope I'm on the right channel this time for X, because last time I put it on Opinion City, it's correct. But head over to Facebook or Twitch or those other platforms, or your favorite podcast apps, and help with the audio side of things too. If you're in your car, you're bored, go check out a past episode. Just listen to it, give a review. It helps out a lot. We are back on Tuesday with our new movie review. It's going to be me solo, and I'll be doing the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem review, which I'm pretty pumped about. I'm a big Turtles fan. Then this Thursday, we're back for another live episode with the Brothers Gray, who jumped my car this weekend. So huge shout out to those guys. Very fun to hang out with after shows and really got to know them a lot the last couple weeks. And,
I don't
really
want to blow
good
up their spot, but I'm a big fan of the Brothers Gray.
Yeah,
when you're done,
well.
can I just mention something real quick here?
Yeah, almost done. So, Sunday, the history of Ole Anderson. Then we're back. We'll be back Tuesday with Primal Fear, Gable Hodder, and then Thursday we'll be doing Courtney with Courtney Smith talking about Terrifier, and then the last episode of the month we are covering WrestleMania 1.
Yeah, the granddaddy of them all. No Crusher on WrestleMania 1, unfortunately. I don't think he ever wrestled on pay-per-view. They probably did some TV. But I don't think the Crusher ever made it to a WWF or any other pay-per-view, because by the time even AWA got the pay-per-view, Crusher was long gone. But while you're on YouTube, if you go over to at Premier Wrestling app, which is the Premier Streaming Network, Premier Wrestling Network, if you go to their live section right now, the latest thing that is on the live section on Premier Wrestling, at Premier Wrestling app on YouTube, is PPW Born the Run, which is the show we were at last night. You'll definitely get a chance to see me because I had to first of all play ring announcer for the end of one match, and then I had to almost get steamrolled by Sammy Chaos because I had to go break up a fight.
You will see me. There's a few times where I rush to do. I grab some gear when I'm not recording my own stuff, and I play doctor for a segment. Yeah.
You may also you almost saw me in a very bad spot too, because there was a point where I was doing a lot of work behind the scenes. I was trying to make sure the show was going off without a hitch, and to kind of take a shortcut. Sometimes if there's nothing really going on, you just sneak out through the curtain and just go
absolutely
somewhere else. And I wasn't really paying attention to my surroundings, and I almost did that. right as Big Dan Champion was making his entrance. I literally got, like, Dan is behind me getting ready. I literally walked to the curtain. I'm about to part. I'm like, oh, I can't do that. And I walk back, and everybody cracks up. Everybody cracks up. And one other thing I do want to just mention real quick.
That is the link if you want to go check out. Subscribe to Premier Wrestling Network. Please go there. Go watch the video if you have a few moments, and comment. You know, BP and ABJ sent us, and what a great show.
And then we have another show coming up, April 20th, 2024. It was on my wall, but you couldn't see it. Super Show 4 on 420. I wonder what that means. You can go to that ppwwrestling.com for more information. That will also be, I don't know if it'll be free. Why did that make my whole screen yellow? It will be free. I don't know if it will be free, but it will be on Premier Network or Premier Streaming Network. But anyway, that's all I got.
I think PPW might be going that route on Premier. I think Premier might be doing a thing where it's going to be, I don't think it's going to be a service anymore, but PPW on YouTube right now.
It is 100% free. Yes.
Yeah. PPW Walk the Line, full show out there right now. PPW Freeze Frame, full show on the YouTube channel right now.
Yeah. That was from Freeze Frame was from January.
Yeah. So there's 3 full PPW shows on that network.
The last 3 shows, Freeze Frame was our January show. That featured that I'm trying to think of what that featured now. I should really know that.
And I'm not. I don't want to blow this up or put anything out there, but like I need you guys to know something right now. Like this podcast started, you know, as Tornado Tag is its own thing a long time ago, and we worked really, really hard at it. And because of this podcast and because of your guys' support and helping us and just us getting out there, like BP is a bigger deal at PPW. Like we came in as fans, and now he's like he's helped backstage helping. He's on screen as an interview guy. Like this podcast opened a lot of doors for us, and we're very thankful for that. And it's really, really cool that we're able to enter as fans, but then be welcomed into the business, and we're being respected by some peers that we don't take lightly for. Like we're very thankful for opportunities and the things that come for us in wrestling. And I just want to wrap up.
It did lead. Sorry, I know I'm making this too long. It did lead to something that was a little like, oh man. I was trying to another friend of ours. I was trying to explain kind of what I do there, and kind of in front of things, and even behind the scenes, like what my role is there. And they're like, oh, okay, so you're Bruce Pritchard. I'm like, damn it, I am Bruce Pritchard.
Yeah, you're definitely Bruce
of all the
Pritchard.
people I have to be, why am I Bruce Pritchard?
You know.
Yeah.
And hopefully one day, you know, you'll get as popular as Bruce Pritchard, and then I will be tailing you and like, can we do a podcast together?
You could be Conrad, yeah.
I'll be my Conrad, yeah. And then we also have Evil Dead Rises. I have to redo this graphic, but this will be joined with one of your drinking buddies at Pilguru.
Oh,
Charles Moran will be joining me on this one.
Mr. Horror Prince himself.
Yep. And then the last podcast.
One of the great artists, too, in the local scene.
Oh, yeah.
Chuck is a great artist.
And you see Chuck a lot of GCW shows when they're in the Northeast area. He's the guy with real long hair, big nose ring, mustache, and glasses. He's a fun dude, big wrestling fan. And then the last episode of the month will be the Dante Elizabeth James episode, TikTok sensation, 611,000 subscribers. So very, very popular, super entertaining.
How popular in Taiwan though?
You might they're not number one.
There you
go.
No.
You
might have a chance.
They might not be number one for wrestling, but they're probably number one for a multitude.
Oh yeah, they're number one for everything else.
They probably do have a higher footprint in Taiwan than we do.
They're amazing. They're super amazing. New merchandise out right now. AEW dropped a new logo, so of course you know Lily had to spoof it. Get ready for Mania season with some ABJ podcast merchandise.
Oh, that Liberty Bell. That Liberty Bell, yeah.
Looks good, right?
You know that you know it's calling you. You know it's calling you.
316 days right around the corner, and
Zach Ertz can be your gateway drug. Okay, Zach Ertz can be your gateway drug.
Zach Ertz is definitely not my gateway. If my gateway drug would be
hard pass,
Jason Kelsey.
Well, he's retired now.
Yeah, but he's my gateway.
He would have been.
Jason Kelsey's the one who made me like the Eagles a little more.
And now he's gone. So once again, I hate the Eagles.
Yeah. I don't do 316, but I definitely do 570 and a little 666. So, and maybe leading up to that 420 show, maybe we'll have another ABJ podcast T-shirt coming. Yeah. And then this logo is done in white, but we also put the gold out there. That's the boxing shirt, I call it, the ABJ 570.
Very cool.
we're doing some game streams. We did a game stream the other day. We did 2K24, which actually got us to a goal for the podcast. So we just hit the 3,000 watch hours to be monetized on YouTube, which is really, really, really exciting. So we're at that level now. I just started doing.
We no longer have to do that 300-hour podcast about WrestleMania 1, though, right?
No,
Okay.
we can shave it down. Yeah, for now.
Okay,
We
good.
just did Assassin's Creed
150.
Mirage, doing some Pokemon game streams, and then we just added some 2K24 content. So we're doing stuff every day on the show for the most part. There's always something new. 5 questions with ABJ. There's a ton we just filmed last night. So we're actually going to 3 days a week with those. So every Monday to Wednesday and Friday will be a brand new 5 questions with ABJ. They're super quick. They're like 10 minutes long, 5 minutes long, but a lot of fun stuff.
Really exciting ones coming up. I heard some of the people you talked to. I'm excited to see some of those.
Yeah, a lot of cool stuff that was done at PPW.
Stay tuned. There's some really fun ones coming.
We're on the quest now of 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 watch hours, and then we're fully monetized on YouTube. So let's keep grinding. Word of mouth gets us where we need to be. We'll be live again tomorrow for Monday Night Raw. Who knows? We might have some people popping in. So a lot of people, my list of podcasting and guests is real long. But I've been telling more wrestlers, especially younger ones, if you need a platform to come talk or tell about an upcoming show or just want to get a little bit of your story out before we do a full episode, come join me on the Hangouts when we watch Raw, Dynamite, and SmackDown. So we might have some guests popping in to come hang out with us. And the door is always open for anyone to come in and chat it up a little bit. But that's all I got. Brian, anything else you want to plug?
No, I think I did my shameless plugs already. I think I'm good.
All right, well, let's wrap this up. Tornado Tag Podcast, episode 116, the history of Bruiser and Crusher. We're out of here. Here's some music by the Converse Kid. We'll catch you next time.
Yeah, turkey necks.
Thanks for watching this presentation. Like, share, and subscribe for more.